So in learning how to light, we've gone into those 4 basic facets in quite a lot of depth, and we've moved on to more subtle and nuanced things like dynamic range and feathering, and it's time to really complicate things now by talking about mixing different types of light. Don't forget, this is a completely free course learning how to light right from the basics through to more advanced, complicated scenarios, which I'm releasing every week on the YouTube channel. Obviously subscribe if you want to get notifications, hit like if you like it. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments below. But let's find out what happens when you mix different lighting types.
So what happens when you mix different types of lighting? Well, if you mix different types of continuous lighting, so daylight and artificial continuous light, such as this great big tungsten thing here, you might have quantity issues and you might have colour issues, both of which we'll discuss in more depth later when we talk about the pros and cons of lights like this. If you mix continuous light and flash, however, things get a bit more complicated. Mixing continuous light, you can see what's happening. You can turn one of these lights on, you can see where the light falls, you can see how bright it is in relation to something like daylight. It's fairly easy to gauge what effect it's having. Flash, of course, emits a very, very brief pulse of light, and that can make it very hard to judge what effect it's having in relation to the other continuous light you're using, where it's falling, how powerful it is, all those sorts of things. And you've also got issues regarding synchronizing it with the shutter. Because of course, I'm sure you appreciate, and we'll go into much more depth when we talk about flash, but flash has to be synchronized to that brief moment when your shutter is open, otherwise the sensor in your camera will not see the flash at all. Don't be afraid of this though, because as we're about to discover, this can allow you to create some quite clever effects. What we have here is a mix of continuous light and flashlight. I've used a tungsten 2 kilowatt light here to give me quite a lot of ambient continuous light to play with, and have shot indoors rather than outside so that I can be certain the numbers all stay consistent across what I'm shooting. Now, exactly the same principles that I'm about to describe will occur if you shoot in daylight. The difference is that I might struggle to find consistent daylight, whereas this way I can be in control and hopefully make things clear for you. The flashlight is a small battery flash head firing through a 60cm square softbox. Since flash is roughly 5,000 Kelvin colour temperature and tungsten is more like 2,800 to 3,000 Kelvin, there is a full sheet of orange gel on the flash to bring its colour temperature down to the same as the tungsten light. Now here's our basic shot. Okay, I've shot here a nice balance between the globe being lit by the flash and there being some continuous ambient light in the background of the shot. Now watch what happens when we alter the shutter speed. As we slow the shutter speed down and therefore let more light in, the background of the image gets brighter, and to some extent so do bits of the subject. As we speed the shutter speed up, the rest of the image, the background, the area not lit by flash, gets much darker. But the subject, our globe lit by the flash, stays pretty much the same. You can think of shutter speed in this context as a dimmer switch. You can choose how light or dark to make the areas not lit by your flash, simply by slowing down or speeding up your shutter speed. Now if we alter the aperture, then both the subject and the background will get lighter or darker. Aperture affects flash as much as it affects continuous light. The same goes for ISO. Only shutter speed allows us to separate out the effects of flash from those of a continuous light. Now this works because the pulse of light from a flash is so brief that it makes no real difference how long the shutter is open for. As long as you use a shutter speed slower than the maximum flash sync speed, which will vary from camera to camera but is usually in the region of 1/250th of a second, changing your shutter speed will not alter the exposure of your flash. Now, at the other end of the scale, hopefully you'll remember, either from the Technical Foundations course or from your own experience, that if you shoot at a shutter speed faster than the maximum sync speed on your camera, you'll start to get black bands on your image. Now this is caused by the inability of the camera to synchronize the brief pulse of the flash with the short period the shutter is open, so you start to see one of the shutter curtains covering part of the image. You can get around this by using some form of high-speed synchronization. I won't detail this here as the various different forms vary from camera to camera and flash to flash. It's worth knowing, however, that even if you can use some form of high-speed sync, there's always a trade-off of some sort, usually in power output, so don't think of it as a magic bullet. So when mixing flash and continuous light, we need to be aware of colour temperature if we're using something like tungsten, but more importantly we need to be aware of different quantities. We can alter the ratio between how much of the continuous light we see and how much of the flash by leaving the aperture and ISO constant but altering the shutter speed. Remember, altering the shutter speed will only affect how much of the continuous light you see. You won't notice a change in the portions of the image lit by flash until you go past the maximum sync speed. I suggest you go and play around with this. It's a really useful trick to know, but it does take a little bit of getting used to. We're going to come on to it later when we look at some of our specific lighting scenarios.
So there you go, that wasn't actually too terrifying, was it? And in fact, mixing different types of light can allow you to create some quite interesting effects. Next week we're going to stick with multiple light sources, and we're going to talk about what happens when you have more than one light, possibly even lots and lots of lights on the go, and how you can get them to work together well. I'll see you then.